The peaceful, early morning fog drifted over Portland Regional Air Base, covering the tarmac in a thick, pearly mist. The air was silent, but there was an evident tension, one that Sarah Donovan, a K-9 handler with the Portland Police Department, detected in the crisp October air. It was 5:42 a.m. The clock on her dashboard may have appeared early, but when it came to operations like this, there was no such thing as too early. As Sarah drove her police SUV into the allotted K-9 unit parking spot, she could feel the mission's weight settle in her chest. The suspense, the need to be sharp and focused, and the understanding that what they were about to do was vital. Maverick, Sarah's 4-year-old Belgian Malinois, shifted in his travel kennel at the back of her vehicle, a barely perceptible movement that told Sarah he, too, felt the energy of the day ahead. Maverick had accompanied Sarah through numerous operations, his calm, unwavering presence a testament to their bond and years of training. The dog, despite his physical might, was noted for his calm, controlled manner even in the most heated situations. However, Sarah sensed that this mission would be different. The weather was expected to change by afternoon, with a storm approaching, but nature has a habit of surprising us, and today was no exception. Sarah stepped out of the car, the crisp October air hitting her, the aroma of jet fuel mingling with the faint perfume of impending rain. She retrieved her gear bag from the passenger seat, mentally ticking off the pre-flight checklist she had done 100 times before. "Almost there, Mav," she whispered quietly, turning back to her puppy. Maverick, his fur a smooth, muscular tan, sprang down from the back of the SUV with amazing agility for a dog of his size. His combat vest, prominently emblazoned "Police" in reflecting letters, flashed under the airbase's security lights. Sarah's gaze turned to the hangar entrance, where Lieutenant James Keller stood, his silver-streaked hair glinting in the overhead lights. Keller was a seasoned officer with 20 years of experience who exuded authority and confidence, which Sarah had come to rely on. His military stance revealed everything she needed to know about his experience and dedication to the task. "Looking sharp this morning, Donovan," Keller said as she approached, his voice low but comforting. Sarah grinned in response. "He's ready as always." Keller checked his watch. "Briefing in 10. The governor's security team has already arrived." Sarah's thoughts were quickly concentrated when she heard about the governor's security squad. Today's mission was critical, providing airborne security for the governor's convoy on her way to a high-profile infrastructure event. Intelligence reports had identified potential dangers along the way, as demonstrations turned violent. The governor's safety was important, and this was not a mission to make mistakes on. Sarah attached Maverick's leash to his harness and followed Keller inside the building. Her thoughts shifted from the tranquility of the parking lot to the professional accuracy required for the task ahead. The team's helicopter, a department-owned Bell 429, stood in the hangar, sleek and imposing under the harsh fluorescent lighting. The aircraft's exterior was a striking blend of black and blue, with the Portland Police logo prominently displayed. It was a powerful computer that Sarah absolutely trusted. Its architecture made it ideal for aerial observation during sensitive operations such as the one they were preparing for. Captain Alex Mercer was giving the chopper a final pre-flight examination. His towering, broad-shouldered figure moved with precision as his hands went over the tail rotor, inspecting each component with an expert eye. The gentle hum of the helicopter's systems created a hushed anxiety in the air. Everyone knew that time was of the essence today. "Morning, Donovan," Mercer said without looking up from his work, his voice full of the relaxed familiarity that comes with years of collaboration. "Is your four-legged companion ready for a rocky voyage today? I hear we're in for some major wind shear." Maverick, as always, stood calmly behind Sarah, his ears flickering up slightly at the sound of Mercer's voice. Sarah grinned and nodded. "Maverick's logged more flight hours than some of your rookies, Mercer. He's used to a little turbulence." The pilot, a former Air Force officer who had moved to police enforcement aircraft, chuckled gently. "Fair enough," he answered, wiping his hands on a handkerchief and kneeling down to give Maverick a scratch behind the ears. The dog smelled his palm briefly before accepting the attention, wagging his tail in response. Sarah and Mercer shared a knowing gaze. They both realized that Maverick's calming presence was essential for operations like this. The dog had seen it all: high-speed chases, tracking, bomb detection, and a variety of other missions. However, each flying operation was unique and presented a fresh set of challenges. Mercer straightened up, projecting confidence. "Let's hope Maverick's instincts remain sharp today. We'll need them. You're both with me on this one, correct?" Sarah nodded, checking her equipment one last time. "Always, Captain." Lieutenant Keller motioned everyone to gather. "Briefing in the operation room, now," he indicated. His tone was severe, as usual, but there was an underlying sense of urgency. Today's assignment was more than just a routine task, it was high risk. Inside the operating room, the rest of the crew was already assembling. Officers Wilson and Rodriguez, both tactical specialists, had already set up their gear near the aircraft, stacking heavy-duty equipment neatly in readiness for deployment. They nodded as Sarah passed, occasionally casting a courteous glance at Maverick. Both had observed Maverick's extraordinary powers firsthand during earlier operations. Agent Morris, the governor's security coordinator, stood in front of a digital map display. Her severe expression revealed nothing about how she felt about the assignment, but Sarah knew that a woman in her position did not need to display emotion. She was all business, a no-nonsense attitude to a highly sensitive job. "Good, we're all here," Agent Morris announced, her voice strong. She didn't waste time exchanging niceties. "The motorcade will leave at 7:30. We have credible intelligence indicating that anticipated demonstrations along Route May 16 escalate into civil violence. Our job is to provide aerial security and keep an eye on the sky." Sarah felt a surge of seriousness as she received the information. This was no ordinary mission, it was a high-profile operation with the potential for significant escalation. Her mind rapidly switched to tactical mode, taking into account all of the variables and potential threats. Mercer, ever the professional, interrupted the briefing with a quick look out the hangar windows. "The weather window is closing quickly. We need to become airborne within the next 30 minutes if we want to evade the approaching storm." Keller nodded in accord. "We're ready on our end," he added, addressing the rest of the crew. "Officer Wilson, what is your gear status?" "Night vision, thermal, and communications are operational," Officer Wilson said, standing tall by his equipment. Sarah looked across at Maverick, who was still standing calmly beside her. "K9 unit is mission ready. Maverick's repelling harness and protective gear are all set," she tweeted. As the briefing progressed, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of duty fall on her shoulders. Maverick had been an essential collaborator, but now the stakes were higher than ever. There were threats out there that they couldn't predict, and it was their responsibility to keep the governor safe. "Are there any final questions?" Agent Morris inquired, her gaze sweeping the room. When no one talked, she simply nodded curtly. "We will proceed as planned. The communications check is at 0700. Wheels up at 0750. Sarah raced through a mental checklist as the team prepared to load their equipment onto the chopper. She needed to make sure everything was in place, and Maverick needed to be just as prepared as she was. His specialized hearing protection was in place, his tactical vest was snug, and his repelling harness had been examined for signs of wear. She had no concerns about his readiness, it was what he had been educated for. "Come together, people." "Departure in 15, Mercer announced, fully dressed in his flying gear and ready to begin his final pre-flight procedures. Ryan Chen, his co-pilot, was in the cockpit checking the final systems. Sarah and Maverick stood at the edge of the helicopter ramp, watching the tactical team load their equipment. The rotors remained motionless for the time being, but the helicopter was alive with electricity, its systems buzzing as it sprang to life under Mercer's expert hands. Sarah stepped forward, ready to board alongside Maverick. But, when she took her first step up the slope, something odd occurred. Maverick froze. His body became rigid, his feet firmly planted on the asphalt, and his gaze fixed on the chopper. It was evident that he was not going to move. Sarah stood frozen for a time, unsure what was going on. Maverick had never done this before, not in all the years they had worked together, not during the tough training exercises and real-world operations. He'd always been trustworthy, obedient, and exact. Today, however, was different. The dog's body language was unmistakable, tight and tense, ears pointed forward, eyes fixed on the chopper. He refused to move, as if he sensed something no one else did. "Maverick," Sarah said quietly, her voice kind yet forceful. "Come on, boy, let's go." She tugged the leash slightly, but the dog didn't move. It was as if an invisible force held him fast to the tarmac. Lieutenant Keller, who had been seeing the interaction from afar, approached with a frown. "What's the problem, Donovan?" His voice was tinged with frustration, but there was also concern. Keller had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize that when something strange occurred with the K-9 team, it was worth looking into. Nonetheless, the mission had a timeline. The governor's motorcade was set to leave in 40 minutes, so every second counted. Sarah's eyes remained riveted on Maverick. "He's hesitating," she explained slowly, attempting to make sense of the situation. "Give me a moment." Maverick was still stuck in place, reluctant to even look at Sarah. His gaze was fixed on the aircraft, his muscles tightened, and his body language was so vigilant that it was almost unsettling. Sarah crouched alongside him, running her hands down his back, attempting to calm him. But Maverick didn't respond to her presence. He was concentrating on something she couldn't see. Keller's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Donovan, we don't have time for this dog drama," he said, his frustration evident. "The motorcade will leave in 40 minutes. We have to get airborne or we will miss our window." "I know, sir," Sarah replied gently, attempting to maintain her cool. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on her, but she knew she had to trust Maverick. However, this is not normal behavior. Maverick isn't simply being difficult or nervous. This is different. He is picking up on something. Keller crossed his arms and leaned back slightly to assess the situation. "He's presumably alarmed by the weather change. We have all felt it. The wind is picking up. Let's not make things more complicated than they need to be." Sarah shook her head, her mind already repeating many scenarios in which Maverick saw danger before anybody else. She recalled a training event 6 months prior in which Maverick refused to enter a warehouse. The trainers initially assumed he was merely out of sorts, but it wasn't until they had called off the search that they uncovered a gas leak so subtle that no one had seen it, except Maverick. The dog had saved them that day. It wasn't just anxiety. Maverick was trained to identify even the smallest irregularities, such as bombs, gas leaks, and mechanical problems. She knew when he acted like way, he was serious. "Maverick," Sarah stated firmly, crouching at his level. "Heel." She tugged the leash more assertively, but the dog did not reply. Instead, Maverick took a purposeful step backward, as if to prevent her from approaching the chopper. This was not hesitancy. This was alert behavior. Maverick's body language indicated that he had discovered something. But what? Sarah could not observe anything out of the ordinary. From where she stood, the helicopter appeared to be in wonderful condition, and the team had completed 3 separate sweeps of it in the previous 12 hours. There should have been nothing else to detect. "Donovan, what is the situation?" Mercer's voice rang out from within the aircraft. He was plainly upset by the delay. "We have a rigorous timeline here. What's happening?" Sarah hesitated, caught between her obligation to obey orders and the growing suspicion that Maverick's behavior was more than just an anomaly, it was a warning. She took a big breath and looked at Keller, who was still waiting for an answer. She realized this was her opportunity to speak up. Lieutenant, I'd like to suggest that the departure be delayed for one additional examination. Based on Maverick's actions, I believe there is something on this helicopter that we need to handle, Sarah remarked calmly, despite the tension mounting inside her. Keller furrowed his brow as he digested the request. He understood the significance of the task, but Sarah had always been a dependable officer. Maverick had proved himself time and again. However, the practical part of Keller's intellect struggled to strike a balance between hurry and caution. 5 minutes, Keller finally remarked, his voice clipped but filled with concern. We have 5 minutes, Donovan. Not a second more. Sarah quickly nodded and returned her attention to Maverick. Show me, boy, she said, unclipping his lead from his harness. Maverick instantly started to work. His nose twitched as he began to pace around the chopper, his movements precise and focused. Sarah could see how he moved, he wasn't sniffing aimlessly. He was tracking and isolating something specific. The tactical squad stood to the side, their interest piqued. Officer Garcia, one of the team's specialists, said Officer Rodriguez, $20 says the dog's right. Rodriguez chuckled quietly. The dog has saved our hides more times than I can remember. He's typically right on. Mercer, who had been watching the conversation from the cockpit, approached with a worried look. What exactly is he doing? He inquired, now totally involved in the matter. Sarah looked up to Mercer as Maverick continued his systematic search. Scent tracking. He was trained to identify bombs, but he can also detect gasoline leaks, hydraulic fluid, and even electrical problems. Anything that alters the equipment's natural smell profile. Mercer's eyes opened slightly. So he's basically a walking chemical detector? Exactly, Sarah responded, her voice steely. Dogs have extraordinary senses of smell. Maverick can detect quantities as low as parts per trillion of some chemicals. That's why bomb-sniffing dogs are so effective, they can identify explosives that our most advanced detectors miss. Sarah returned her focus to Maverick, watching as the dog circled the plane with its snout to the ground. Maverick's moves were deliberate and purposeful. She knew the pattern, Maverick was focusing on the location of the scent. The dog had been through hundreds of training sessions, and Sarah knew this was the type of behavior he displayed when he was on the hunt for something significant. Finally, Maverick came to a rest at the helicopter's tail portion. His body assumed a formal alert position, sitting straight and maintaining constant eye contact with the point where the tail boom met the fuselage. This was an obvious indicator that he'd found anything. He's got something, Sarah remarked, her voice full of eagerness. Mercer, who had been standing at a distance, advanced rapidly, his gaze scanning the area Maverick was looking at. That's near the tail rotor control assembly, he told me. I checked that during pre-flight, and everything looked fine. Sarah nodded. Check again, she stated sternly. Maverick's actions were not to be disregarded. Mercer bent down to study the area more closely. His hands traced the components, looking for anything that would explain Maverick's alert. However, there was nothing obvious. The helicopter appeared to be in good working order from the outside. Nothing visible from the exterior, Mercer confessed, his voice now laced with apprehension. But that doesn't mean there's nothing wrong. Sarah stood by Maverick, who was fixated on the spot, his gaze immovable. She could tell the team was growing impatient, but she trusted her buddy. Maverick had never been wrong, and today was no exception. Whatever he'd discovered was vital. Seconds later, the scenario changed drastically. Chen, the co-pilot who was inspecting the helicopter's systems, called out. Hold up, he remarked, his tone changing from skeptical to concerned. We've got a problem here. Mercer went over to Chen's side, his look solemn. Sarah followed with her pulse hammering. What they were going to discover was not good. Chen carefully studied the exposed tail rotor control assembly, using his finger to trace the previously undetected crack. Jesus, Mercer murmured under his breath, returning Maverick's gaze with renewed reverence. What is it? Keller responded fast after seeing the shift in Mercer's behavior. What is going on? Control rod assembly, Mercer clarified, his voice taut with apprehension. It shows stress fractures. This may have failed during flight, especially given the turbulence we expect. This is serious. Sarah felt a shiver go down her spine. She had felt something was wrong, but hearing the gravity of the problem made it all the more apparent. As Mercer continued to evaluate the damage, the tension in the air increased. The enormity of the situation became all too obvious. A stress fracture in the control rod assembly, especially in a key component like this, was more than just a minor problem, it was a ticking time bomb. And if Maverick hadn't noticed it, the consequences may have been terrible. What is the timeline? Keller inquired, his voice suddenly harsher, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Mercer did not hesitate. Based on the stress propagation and the way the metal has been deteriorating, I believe it will fail within hours. But if we were in the air right now, especially with the projected turbulence, it might go considerably faster. The ramifications of Mercer's comments were heavy in the air. Maverick had the ability to save all of their lives, including the governor's. If the tail rotor control assembly failed during flight, it might have resulted in a catastrophic spin or an emergency landing in extreme conditions. And these were the best-case circumstances. Worst-case scenario? An uncontrolled crash occurs during a key operation. Chen pointed at the damaged area. The fracture pattern does not appear natural. There are compression lines around the crack, indicating that an external force was used to purposely weaken it. The revelation struck like a thunderclap. Sabotage, Keller mumbled, struggling to believe what he was hearing. He looked around at the crew, their faces frozen in amazement, each of them aware of the potential consequences of this revelation. Could be, Mercer said, his tone bleak. This crack was created by more than just mechanical stress. It has been purposely weakened. The change in operation was immediate. What had begun as a routine task to provide security for the governor's motorcade had evolved into something far more complex, a possible instance of sabotage. Do we have security footage of the hangar from the past 72 hours? Keller exclaimed into his radio. His command was fast and calculated. I would like to have every entry and departure examined instantly. Grab any footage you can find. And retrieve the maintenance logs. Now. Sarah remained near Maverick, her thoughts whirling. Despite the tension, the dog remained alert and sat at attention. She could tell Maverick understood the significance of what had been discovered. The stakes had recently been heightened, and it wasn't just about a failed helicopter. The operation has developed into a security breach probe. The immediate task to protect the governor now seemed like simply the beginning. Minutes went like hours. The team, now completely committed to the sabotage probe, worked in complete silence as they analyzed the helicopter's records, security footage, and maintenance files. Sarah stood by Maverick's side, her mind still reeling. Mercer, who had been annoyed by the delay, now had a newfound respect for Sarah and her K-9 partner. His previous reservations had been fully removed. Maverick had discovered something that the human eye had overlooked, something critical that no one else had seen. Your partner just saved lives, Mercer stated gently, his words having weight Sarah had not expected to hear from him. Sarah nodded and gave Maverick a gentle stroke on the head. He does this every day. The tension in the hangar subsided as the first shock of the revelation gave way to a more urgent sense of focus. The pilots had a backup chopper ready in case of any further problems, and the security team was on high alert, realizing that this was no ordinary security breach, it was an attack. Whoever was behind this meant to trigger a catastrophic failure. Mercer, Sarah started, her voice firm but with an edge of professional determination. Maverick's alert conduct was not limited to the helicopter. There is something greater going on here. I don't think this happened at random. This was not a small mechanical issue. What's the fracture pattern? It was purposeful. Someone wants to ground this helicopter. Mercer addressed her gaze. I agree. The pattern does not lie. As the team worked to remove the broken components and prepare for further inspections, Sarah noticed Keller standing a few feet away, listening carefully to his radio. Lieutenant, I believe we need to review our security protocols. This could be part of a much bigger problem, one involving more than just the helicopter. Keller nodded grimly, his eyes narrowing as he considered the gravity of the situation. I suppose you're correct, Donovan. We need to expand this inquiry. Get the entire squad on high alert. Let's make sure nothing else is jeopardized. The sound of helicopters and police radios filled the air as the squad went about their task. The mission was clearly on hold indefinitely. The governor's motorcade would still travel, but without aerial support. The helicopter crew was intent on conducting a comprehensive assessment, working carefully to verify that no other hazards were buried beneath the surface. Meanwhile, security personnel were studying the tape, documenting the sabotage, and seeking for indications that it was part of a wider, organized effort. Sarah, still behind Maverick, went over the mental checklist in her thoughts. She realized the problem wasn't over. It had barely just begun. This was about more than just one hacked helicopter. It was about someone attempting to undermine the department's operations. The broader question remained, who was doing this and why? As the team continued to seek for answers, the storm outside intensified. The wind blew through the air, rattling the windows of the hangar. The rain began to fall in sheets, greatly exacerbating the situation. What was supposed to be a simple security operation has become a race against the clock to discover the truth about the sabotage attempt. Sarah, we've got a lead, Keller announced as he approached, his countenance determined. We have security footage showing a maintenance contractor accessing the helicopter 2 nights ago during unlawful hours. His name is Ryan Denton. He was in the hangar for around 28 minutes. We are tracking his movements. Sarah's mind quickly went into motion. Denton. That name doesn't sound familiar, but I'll wager he's involved in some way. Get in touch with the local authorities, Keller told us. We're going to need to track him down fast. Mercer, who had been examining the helicopter's status, looked up and sighed. We'll have this bird fixed. But this is more than simply a mechanical failure. This appears to be industrial sabotage, not a random accident. Sarah's thoughts raced. She had felt something was wrong, but now it was clear, the helicopter was the intended target, and the sabotage was not going to stop here. Someone was behind this, and they intended to make sure the department was held accountable. The conclusion struck hard, this was more than just a failed mission or a delayed helicopter journey. This was an organized effort, a well-thought-out attempt to disrupt not only the Portland Police Department's aviation unit, but also the governor's security detail. Maverick's sharp senses had accidentally discovered the first clue in what turned out to be a vast conspiracy. Sarah remained glued to Maverick, who had entered his typical, working mode, calm, focused, and alert, as the team processed the results. His ability to remain calm in the face of pandemonium made him important in instances like this. The dog was more than simply a member of the squad, he was an invaluable asset who had just saved many lives. Meanwhile, the maintenance logs were being reviewed, and surveillance footage of Ryan Denton's unlawful entry to the helicopter was displayed on a large screen in the operations room. The video plainly shows Denton entering the hangar late at night, using authentic credentials, and staying 28 minutes near the aircraft. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the usual, but what transpired after Denton left prompted suspicions. You don't just go into a secured hangar at night without a reason, Keller mumbled as he peered at the image. And you definitely don't spend that long with a helicopter unless you're tampering with it. Sarah felt her stomach twist. She realized that as they went deeper, the situation became more perilous. Denton was not an isolated incident, he was a pawn in a much bigger game. The fact that he was working for a competing helicopter business heightened her concerns. This wasn't merely a technical issue, it was deliberate sabotage intended to damage the Portland Police Department's aviation unit and the governor's security. "Let's track this guy down," Keller said into the radio, his voice steady yet urgent. "Find out where Denton is currently. Collect every resource we have on him. If he's still in town, we need to bring him in." Sarah knew it wouldn't be that simple. If Denton was involved in something as severe as industrial sabotage, he would not go down without a struggle. However, the Portland Police Department refused to back down. The storm had worsened outside the hangar. The howling wind rattled the building's walls, as rain pelted the roof, rattling the windows. The weather made everything feel more urgent and dramatic. As the team resumed their work inside, Sarah realized they were running out of time. The governor's summit was still scheduled to go place, but without the anticipated aircraft support, the motorcade's security was jeopardized. But the real question was how far this conspiracy extended. Was Denton operating alone, or did someone else pull the strings? "Lieutenant, I think we need to consider the possibility that Denton wasn't the only one involved," Sarah remarked, her voice tight with fear. "If he works for a competitor aviation company, there could be more persons involved. The stakes are larger than a single helicopter." Keller gazed at her, his face deepening. "Do you think there's a larger network at play here?" "Could be," Sarah said, her mind already putting together the clues. "We know Denton had legitimate access to the hangar and was directed to weaken the helicopter's tail rotor control. But why? To cause a failure, yes, but there's more to it. Someone is backing him." Mercer, who had been standing by and listening, moved forward. "If it was sabotage, they wouldn't just target one helicopter. They'll be looking for ways to strike at the center of the department and undermine our security." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. And if we don't find Denton and figure out who is behind this as quickly as possible, we may be dealing with something lot more serious than mechanical sabotage." Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, breaking through the building tension in the room. "Lieutenant Keller," the officer on the other end stated, "we've found Ryan Denton. He's on his way to the bus station. We need a backup." Keller's gaze flickered to Sarah. "Looks like we've found our guy. You ready?" "Let's do it," Sarah murmured, her voice level but with an undercurrent of stress. She turned to face Maverick. "Are you ready, Mav?" The Belgian Malinois answered with a fast wag of his tail, pricking his ears and focusing his eyes. Sarah saw the dog was already in work mode, even without the regular commands. Maverick could sense the intensity in the air, and now that the sabotage had been discovered, the hunt was on. Sarah's mind was racing as they made their way through the hangar to the waiting vehicles. They were preparing to arrest Denton, but did they know anything about him? What would they discover once he was in custody? If Denton was behind this, they'd soon discover who else was involved. Meanwhile, the storm outside worsened, making the entire operation feel like a race against the clock. The wind howled as Sarah and her colleagues climbed into their vehicles and drove toward the bus stop where Denton had been followed. The storm's ferocity seemed to reflect the growing importance of their inquiry. It became evident that Denton was more than just an unhappy employee. He'd been a part of something much bigger, and they needed to figure out who was directing it. Sarah's mind raced while they drove. The sabotage was so meticulously planned and inconspicuous that it almost went undetected. If Maverick hadn't noticed anything unusual, the helicopter may have taken off with a faulty tail rotor control, with disastrous results. The fact that Maverick had picked it up wasn't just a coincidence, it was a result of the dog's training and amazing sensory talents. But there was more to the puzzle. Maverick had discovered the problem, now they needed to figure out who was responsible and why. When they arrived at the bus station, it was evident that Denton was on the move. The authorities had already encircled the location, and Denton was quickly apprehended as he attempted to board a bus bound for Seattle. He looked guilty as they approached. There was no denying the strain in his stance, or the way he avoided eye contact. It seemed as if he knew he'd been caught but was still attempting to keep his calm. "Ryan Denton," Sarah exclaimed, her voice firm. "We are with the Portland Police Department. You've been arrested on accusations of sabotage and criminal conspiracy. Turn around, and place your hands behind your back." Denton hesitated for a short second before making a half-hearted attempt to run. But he didn't get far. The officers immediately grabbed him, and Sarah entered with Maverick by her side. "Maverick, search," she ordered. The dog went right to work, smelling Denton's stuff with accuracy. Maverick's capacity to detect even the smallest traces of questionable material was essential in this case. Within seconds, he noticed a little package tucked under Denton's jacket. Sarah gently grabbed it, and inside she discovered multiple documents outlining the sabotage plan and interactions with a competing helicopter firm. "This is it," Sarah gently stated, bringing up the evidence for Keller to examine. "This is the proof that we need. Everything is here." The atmosphere at the bus station was tense. Sarah stood upright, her gaze analyzing the evidence Maverick had helped find. The tiny suitcase Denton had been attempting to conceal carried more than just paperwork, it contained the truth. Keller stood beside Sarah, his gaze deepening as he examined the documents in her palm. "Well, this explains everything," he remarked, his voice strained with hardly restrained rage. "We have confirmation now. Denton was not working alone. He was part of a far wider plan to discredit our aviation unit and, more significantly, to jeopardize the overall safety of this mission." Sarah's mind raced as she considered the significance of what had been discovered. The materials in the bag were more than simply a confession, they were a plan for the sabotage. There were handwritten notes, directions, and even precise time for the helicopter's upkeep. Someone had clearly spent a significant amount of time planning this, ensuring that every detail was taken into account. But it was still unclear who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Keller's phone vibrated in his pocket, bringing Sarah back to the present. He answered swiftly, paying close attention to the voice on the other line. "Roger that. Keep me updated." He shut up the phone and turned to Sarah with a somber expression on his face. "They are obtaining surveillance footage from a competing helicopter firm. We may have a direct relationship between them and Denton." Sarah felt a chilly sense of understanding sweep over her. So it wasn't just sabotage for its own purpose. It was about money. They sought to tarnish our department so that they could restart the bidding process for the helicopter contract. "Exactly," Keller said, his voice tense. Someone at the top of that competing company had a lot to gain from this. They realized that causing an incident, no matter how minor, would be enough to warrant an investigation. And if we couldn't show the safety of our aircraft unit, they might be able to reclaim the contract. Mercer, who had been standing on the fringe of the conversation, moved forward. But Denton was simply an instrument in this. Someone else arranged it, someone with the means to make it happen. We need to find out who that is, and quickly. As the team worked through the evidence and followed up on leads, Sarah couldn't shake the sensation that they were merely scratching the surface of something far bigger. Maverick had located the first clue, but there was still more to discover. The sabotage was carried out by more than one dissatisfied worker. "Let's move, people," Keller said, jolting Sarah back to reality. "We need to get Denton back to the station for questioning. We'll have to apply pressure to find out what else he knows. And we need to obtain such film from the competing company. There is no time to waste." The ride back to the station went smoothly, but Sarah's thoughts was everything but tranquil. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but she could feel a storm brewing just ahead. This was not going to be simple. As the squad entered the questioning room, Denton was already sitting at the table, his posture stooped and his eyes darting anxiously from one officer to the next. He didn't look like he'd just been caught, but there was an underlying sense of remorse in his posture. Sarah knew this man wouldn't give up easily, he'd been trained to mask his tracks. But Maverick's involvement had already demonstrated that Denton was not as intelligent as he imagined. "Maverick, take a seat," Sarah whispered quietly, stroking the seat beside her as the dog snuggled in. Denton squirmed in his chair, apparently uncomfortable with the circumstances. He had been apprehended, but he was not giving up without a fight. The officers stood behind him, eyes fixed on him, waiting for him to make the first move. "Ryan Denton," Sarah said, her voice calm and steady. "You've been arrested on suspicion of sabotage and criminal conspiracy. We know you tampered with a police helicopter, and we have proof to prove it." Denton shifted uneasily. I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, attempting to keep his cool. "I am merely a contractor. I know nothing about sabotage." Sarah leant forward, her eyes unflinching. "We have seen the documents you left behind, Ryan. We know you were recruited by someone from a competing helicopter firm to harm our aircraft. You believed you could get away with it, but you underestimated Maverick." Denton's eyes widened as he looked uneasily at Maverick, who was sitting quietly at Sarah's feet. The dog's mere presence was enough to unsettle him. "You don't have a leg to stand on," Keller replied, his tone harsh and forceful. "Ryan, tell us who hired you. The sooner you collaborate, the easier things will be for you." Denton paused for a moment before his shoulders dropped. "Okay," he mumbled, just above a whisper. "I did not intend for it to go this far. I was simply doing what I was told." "Who told you?" Sarah pressed. "It was Greg McAllister," Denton said, his voice trembling. "He is the one who hired me. He serves as the competing company's director of operations. He promised me $10,000 if I could induce a mechanical failure that would cast doubt on your department's aviation unit and force the contract bidding to be reopened." Sarah's heart sunk when Denton said her name. Greg McAllister. She assumed the sabotage was part of a wider plan, but hearing the name proved it. McAllister wasn't just any competitor, he had the strength and means to carry out a plan like this. He was willing to put people's lives at risk, even the governor's, for the sake of money and business. "Where is McAllister today?" Keller inquired, his tone low and menacing. "I don't know," Denton instantly said. "He has been on the move. He urged me to leave town once the task was complete. I had no idea it would go this far." Keller's expression tightened. "We are going to get him, Ryan. And you are going to aid us." Denton had a pallid face as he gazed down at his hands. He was well aware that McAllister's name would eventually surface. There was no way out of this situation. As the interrogation ended, Sarah and the crew proceeded rapidly to investigate Denton's confession. They called local authorities to determine McAllister's whereabouts. The competing helicopter companies' data were being sifted through, and every trail was being followed. Sarah stood by the window, watching the rain continue to fall outside. The storm had intensified, and so had the investigation. Maverick stood alongside her, cool and unflappable as usual. "You did good, Mav," Sarah whispered tenderly, placing her palm on his head. When the dog heard her voice, his ears perked up, and he softly leaned against her. She smiled, a rare moment of calm in the middle of mayhem. The sound of footsteps behind her interrupted the moment. Keller's expression was bleak. "We've got a lead on McAllister," he explained, handing her a piece of paper. "He has been observed near the airport. We believe he is preparing to depart the state. We need to move quickly." Sarah nodded, her determination strengthened. The storm was not only outside, but also inside her. And now it was time to complete what they had started. "Let's go," she replied, glancing down at Maverick. "We're not finished yet."